I woke to the glow on the dresser at 2:07 in the morning. It was the quiet light, the one that does not flash like a siren but waits like a lighthouse. The sender was admin service. The message was a gentle blade. Effective immediately, your role is transitioned to strategic advisor. Details to follow. I typed one word. Understood. I set the phone face down and listened to the city. Somewhere a truck sighed. Somewhere water moved through the old pipes in the wall. I put the kettle on, washed the cup while the water warmed, and walked into the small room where I keep my own machine and my own papers. I did not open the company laptop. I opened mine, the one that remembers my touch without needing permission from anyone else. My name is Jayla Terry. I am the person that writes the rules into the bones of a building and then stays to hear if the bones hold. People call it compliance. I call it architecture. You can love glass. You should respect steel. The vault on my screen opened after a passphrase that lives somewhere behind my breath. A plain directory appeared. Zurich, Singapore, Dublin, Hong Kong, Toronto, Cayman, the same order every time because rhythm protects the mind. There was a file at the top of the list that I look at without opening when I want my heart to slow. Section 7.15, Change of Control of Compliance. It is a firm title. It does not need a speech. Steam rose from the kettle. I poured the water, pressed the tea bag against the cup, and sat with my knees tucked under the chair so I could feel the ground. The message on my phone was still waiting, calm as snow. Strategic advisor. It says be grateful. It means step aside. I have been told to step aside before. Doors do not move me unless they're the kind I designed. I drafted an email to a banker who appreciates calm grammar. Dear Marion, there has been a material change to my position that may impact ongoing verification. I will continue to ensure transparency within my scope. Please initiate any protective review you deem appropriate. I read the words twice, adjusted nothing, and sent them. Protective review. It is the right phrase. It is not frozen accounts. It is not a crisis. It is a hand placed where gravity needs it. A second email went to internal audit. Dear team, summary of cross-border safeguards attached. Sections 7 through 15 require attention within stated windows. I am available to advise within my new scope. The attachment carried 800 pages and the shape of several years of my life. I do not think of pages as weight. I think of them as rails. They keep trains from wandering into rivers. The phone hummed again. New calendar invites appeared from people who had never asked to meet me before. None of them used the words duty of care. One of them used the word friction. I set the phone back down, turned the screen over, and let the calls complete their rings without my voice. I checked the clocks that line my monitor like quiet planets. Singapore was about to open. The first counter in the first bank would wake and ask its questions. Who is your head of compliance? Who signs this? Who is permitted to move reserves when signatures change? The answers were written a long time ago. The answers do not care about moods. I test the system in small ways when I need to remember that paper is stronger than pride. I opened a log from a routine quarterly drill 2 years earlier. There were notes in the margin. Use precise nouns. Keep timestamps visible. Never allow a decision without a written reason. I had forgotten I wrote that. It still helped. I took the tea to the window and watched the thin line of dawn turn the river into a pencil sketch. I do not pray in the morning. I align. There is a difference. I align my thoughts with the documents that carry the promises we made. A company is not a family and not a faith. It is a set of promises written down. At 4:15, I began drafting notices that must exist whether or not anyone enjoys writing them. I kept the nouns that regulators like to see. Verification, continuity, custody, audit trail. I reread every sentence and asked the same question each time. If I had to speak this in a room with microphones, would my breath remain steady? If the answer was no, I rewrote it. By 5, a small wind had appeared between the buildings and the first delivery vans were practicing their turns. I saved a working note to myself with a simple title: How to Keep a Tower Standing When the Wind Changes. A tower stands because someone respected forces that most people cannot see. The wind does not hate a tower. The wind only exists. The tower remains or falls depending on how it was made. I put on a coat and walked 2 blocks to a coffee shop that opens early for people who believe numbers can be friendly if you give them clear instructions. The barista nodded when she saw me. She did not ask for my name. She knows what I read and how long I stay. I sat with my back to a wall where I could see the door and the television that broadcasts the market crawl like a river that has learned to speak. The first message from inside the building arrived while the espresso was cooling enough to drink. It was from an assistant with careful punctuation. The new executive would like to meet at 7:30 for a brief alignment. I thanked her and told her that I was available for written alignment at any time and that I could meet in person once a head of compliance independent from the executive was properly appointed. She replied with a neutral sentence that ends conversations without closing them. Understood. I admire that kind of sentence. I was on the third page of a history book about a different empire when an engineer with careful hair and a tie that had been tied without vanity stepped through the door. He saw me through the glass and hesitated the way people hesitate when they are about to speak across a line that they cannot name. He came to the table with his hands tucked into his sleeves. "Jayla," he said, and the way he said my name told me he had said it in rooms where my name had not always been welcome. There are alerts on the reserve accounts in Asia. They read like a freeze. "Not a freeze," I said, "protected. The difference will matter at noon." He watched the way my mouth shaped the word protected. He is a builder. He hears the shape of words. Protected means we keep the doors from swinging while we check who holds the keys. Frozen means we punish everyone for the choices of a few. He nodded. "There is a timer on the screen that is new to me," he said. T+4 hours. Regulatory window. "It is not new," I said. "You have not had to see it until now. It is there so that when someone changes the person who signs for the building pauses long enough to ask the right questions. You and I both know what happens when a bridge opens all its lanes while the bolts are still being counted." He gave a small sound that I think was a laugh, a tired one. "If you need anything," he said, "logs, screenshots, the order in which the alerts woke, I can send them." Send them. I never say no to logs that are clean. He left with the look of someone who has remembered that right work exists even when glamour is loud. I finished the espresso and ordered tea. Coffee begins the day. Tea carries it. The television behind the counter changed tempo. The river of numbers slowed and then smiled less. The anchor used the phrase technical issues with cross-border settlement. Technical is a word that rooms use when they prefer not to say the law is awake. People shifted on their stools and looked at the door as if a specific person might walk in carrying an answer in a pocket. At 7, the assistant wrote again. "The executive asks that you come in. He will agree to any terms." Any terms is a phrase that drains itself of meaning the moment it leaves the mouth. I wrote back that my terms were already public. Appoint an independent head of compliance who is not the executive. Put the appointment in writing. Align the documentation with regulators in our key markets. After that, I will meet wherever he likes and for however long he needs. I wished her an easy morning. She wished me the same. The runner arrived at 8:40. He wore a fleece with the logo and an expression that belongs mostly to people who work in emergency rooms. "Are you Ms. Terry? The executive would like to see you now. It is important. Everything that happens today is important," I said. "Please tell him I am busy. Please tell him I am available in writing. Please tell him that every minute spent on a meeting is a minute not spent on an appointment that must exist before the rest of the day can behave. People will lose jobs," he said. Good people. Good people lose jobs when bad structure meets bad speed." My voice stayed even. "This is why I built the windows and the rails. This is why I asked the board to separate the roles a year ago. This is why there is a file on my screen with a title no one likes to read. Section 7.15, Change of Control of Compliance. We do not need to speak about that file unless the hour arrives that wants it. Please let him know what I have said." He looked at the door as if someone might tell him he could go. "Thank you," he said, and left with his hands still tucked into his sleeves. At 9:15, I opened my laptop again and watched the little counters for each market turn over like the numbers on old clocks. Zurich murmured. Singapore blinked. A bank in Toronto sent me an automated reply that I could quote in a courtroom without moving a comma. "We have initiated a protective review. We expect continuity of service. We will require confirmation of the independent compliance officer within the stated window. Thank you for your cooperation." I copied the reply into a note and wrote in the margin. Clear, polite, exactly the right nouns. The first loud call from inside the building came at 9:30. The screen filled with the executive name. I watched the ring complete and I let it go to silence. It rang again. I closed my eyes and counted to 20. The ring ended. Calls are for people who think speed proves care. Paper proves care. Paper proves memory. I opened a new document and began to write the thing that I write when a day needs a spine. A company is a set of promises written down. When people break them, the paper does not. The paper waits. The paper remembers. The paper is why the lights come back on after someone treats gravity like a suggestion. An older woman sat 2 tables away with a notebook that had an elastic band around it. She was drawing a floor plan with short, careful strokes. Doors, stairs, a window here for winter light. I like the way she labeled things. She used nouns that made sense. Middle window, north door, she would be a good regulator. At 10, the television said our name out loud. It said that sources reported a pause in certain movements between several markets and a corporation that has made a habit of speaking about speed with the warmth of a choir. The anchor smiled like a person who has learned how to say the word volatility without scaring the room. The price on the side of the screen shook itself like a dog out of water. You could hear a soft intake across the shop that was not fear, only attention. I sipped my tea and read back through the notices I had already sent. I adjusted a date in one of them to include the city time and the universal time. People make mistakes when they guess at the time that lives in someone else's day. I do not like mistakes that are easy to prevent. The executive name filled the phone again at 10:18. I swiped away the screen and set the phone on the book like a paperweight that has opinions. The book was open to a chapter about a governor who decided that rivers could be convinced to choose different paths through charm alone. The river did not agree. The governor now lives mostly in footnotes. The river is still a river. At 10:32, the first notice from a regulator crossed the wire. It was not dramatic. It did not need to be. It said that they were aware of protective measures undertaken in coordination with counterparties. It said that service to ordinary account holders was expected to continue without interruption. The room relaxed in the way people relax when adults speak in complete sentences. Another message from the assistant arrived. The executive asks what you want. I wrote back the truth. I want the building to stand. I want the people who made small promises to be paid before the people who made big speeches. I want a head of compliance that does not answer to the person who writes the speeches. I want the paper to be stronger than our pride. None of that requires my presence in a room. It requires appointments and signatures. She did not reply. She did not have to. At 11, a junior counsel I had mentored in a previous year sent me a 3-line message that made me want to stand up and walk the block. We just found the memo you filed last spring. The one about the conflict if the executive ever held both roles. I am sorry we laughed when you said it out loud. We are not laughing now. I told her that apologies are useful when they bring water to a fire. Otherwise, they are only warmth. She sent back a single word, water. I looked at the clock again. In less than an hour, the window would touch its edge. At noon, the system would move to the next line in a song that never tries to be pretty. If the conflict remained unresolved, supervisory control over certain classes of assets would pass for a time to an independent trustee that had nothing to do with charisma. The trustee would look at the paper and nothing else. The trustee would care about the small account holder and the pension fund clerk and the employees who trusted a share of their future to a plan they did not write. It is not a surprise to me that this is the part of the day I like best. I closed my eyes and listened for that quiet sound that lives underneath the street noise when the hour is almost ready. I could hear cutlery. I could hear shoes on tile. I could hear a quiet laugh from the barista that I had never noticed before, because on most days there is too much importance between me and the sound of human pleasure. My tea was nearly gone. I ordered another and asked for hot water in the cup. I waited while she poured. She slid the cup across with a small nod that says we share a language even if we never name it. On the way back to the table, I felt the first molecule of panic turn around and leave my body. Panic has no use here. This is a day for counting. Another message. This time from a director on the board who has preferred to think of me as a person who enjoys saying no. I read the short paragraph that tried to look casual. It asked whether there was any discretion available regarding the automatic arrangements I had once called protective valves. I wrote back exactly what I believed the first time I wrote the valves. There is no discretion in the existence of a valve. There is always discretion in the speed at which you choose to install what you should have installed yesterday. He thanked me for the clarity. That is his word when he wants to go on the record as a person who heard the right thing at the right time. At 11:20, a friend in Toronto sent me a photograph of the lake. It looked like a sheet of paper held up to the light. The phone hummed again with the executive name. I watched it hum and then quiet. Somewhere in a tower, he was pacing through a conversation he would have preferred to win with charm. I do not dislike charm. I prefer signatures. I set a small digital timer on my screen. I named it Noon and let it count down like a tide that knows its work. My eyes drifted to the file names again. Zurich, Singapore, Dublin, Hong Kong, Toronto, Cayman. Section 7.15 waited above them like a title printed into a lintel. I did not open it. I had written it. I know what it says. Buildings are calmer when the person who drew the plan does not need to reread the plan on the day of the storm. A man I did not know took the seat that the engineer had used earlier and placed a card on the table with both hands. He introduced himself as a liaison from the executive office. He asked if I would be willing to share a message that he could take back with speed. He kept his eyes on the card as if it might run away. Tell him that accounts are not frozen. They are protected. Tell him that the difference will matter at noon. Tell him that if he wants the difference to matter less, he must appoint a head of compliance who is not himself. Put the appointment in writing. File the writing with the people who care. Send the writing to the banks that keep our promises honest. Then I will come and sit with him, and we can speak for as long as useful speech exists. The liaison nodded in a way that said he had prepared himself for this exact answer and still did not enjoy hearing it. He picked up his card and left with shoulders that made the door look heavy. I looked again at the timer. I could feel the minute moving even when I did not look at the numbers. I opened a new page and wrote down 3 sentences so that my hands would not forget what they are for. A building stands when weight meets counterweight. A market remains a market when rules are respected without drama. People keep faith when the paper gives them a place to put their faith. At 11:45, the barista changed the channel on the television to a different news network whose anchors prefer adjectives. The new anchor used the phrase shock move. I smiled into my cup. There is nothing shocking about a guardrail when you drive a mountain road. The only shock is learning that someone thought the mountain would be impressed by their confidence. The assistant wrote one more time. The executive wants to know if noon is a metaphor. I wrote back that noon is a clock. She sent a single period as if to say that a period is a kind of prayer. I closed the laptop for a moment and focused on the cup. The porcelain was warm against my fingers. My breath felt even. I counted to 5 and back down to 1. When I opened the laptop, the timer showed 3 minutes. I felt no urge to speak. Words have all been placed where they need to be. The system is only a hand that reaches out and presses a button that has been waiting years to be pressed. 2 minutes. Across the room, the older woman tore a page from her notebook and tucked it into a pocket as if she had finished drawing a map to a place she already knew. 1 minute. The river of numbers on the television tightened its jaw. Noon. There was no sound at first. There never is. Then my screen showed a note that I have only seen in drills and in drafts. It said that supervisory control for defined classes of assets had passed to the independent trustee in accordance with the language that nobody wanted to read when the sun was bright. It said that ordinary accounts would continue as normal. It said that the trustee was now responsible for the safety of funds belonging to employee benefit plans and small client custody programs until the conflict documented by the regulator had been corrected and documented as corrected. It said the phrases that I wrote when I was younger and hopeful and a little more afraid than I am today. I exhaled, not because I had won anything. There is no victory in a day like this. There is only the relief that nothing important fell. There is the knowledge that people who never knew my name can pick up a prescription after work or pay a school bill next week without wondering why a market they never touched has stopped breathing. The phone rang again with the executive name. I let it complete its sound. The assistant wrote a final message. Appointment in progress. Will send document. Thank you. I answered with a sentence I have used more times than I can count. I appreciate your diligence. The engineer sent me a screenshot of logs. The time stamps lined up like soldiers in a photograph that nobody sends to the papers. He added a line. We will keep it clean. I typed back the thing that people rarely hear and always deserve. Thank you for the work that never becomes a story. I closed the vault and sat back in the chair. The cup was empty. The day had truly begun. I would spend the afternoon answering questions with the words that do not raise anyone's blood pressure. I would say protected instead of frozen. I would say independent instead of loyal. I would say documented instead of promised. I would say the simple nouns until they made a bridge from panic to patience. I wrote a last note to myself in the file I had titled in the dark. The task is not to win an argument. The task is to keep the lights on and the stairs safe while pride learns to sit in a smaller chair. I saved the note. I let the document rest. The city continued to move. A bus exhaled. A hand turned a key. A kettle clicked. The world did not end. It aligned. At 12:01, the room sounded different even though nothing made a noise. Silence has textures. This one felt like a sheet pulled tight across a bed. The television spoke of ordinary service continuing. The words settled into the tables and onto the floor. People returned to their cups. The barista breathed out the way a swimmer does when their hands find the wall. I reopened the file where I store answers I may need before someone finishes a question. I titled a new page Midday Clarifications. The first line was a sentence that could travel anywhere without a chaperone. The trustee does not own the funds. The trustee supervises them to keep promises safe until conflicts are corrected. I added a second line for people who prefer pictures. Think of a drawbridge that lifts while repair crews work on bolts. Boats still move, people still cross. There is order and there is safety. The assistant sent me a short note. Draft appointment attached for your awareness. I opened the attachment and read it slowly. Names, dates, jurisdictions. All the nouns that help a paper carry its share of the day. The signature line for a new head of compliance waited like a hand that understands tools. I replied with a list of 3 small changes that would keep a regulator from frowning tomorrow. She thanked me with 2 words that told me she had started to enjoy the feel of precision. I stood and stretched. The older woman with the notebook had left a small square of graph paper under her empty cup. A room can hold small kindness in the middle of large events. I walked to the counter and asked for hot water. The barista filled the cup and smiled with the plain happiness of a person who knows their work matters to strangers. Back at the table, I wrote to the team in internal audit. Please capture all inbound and outbound messages related to the noon transition. Include headers and timestamps. Label the set for the regulator by market. Use the phrase factual summary in the cover sheet. I signed it with my full name and my current role. Paper likes people who remember who they are. The engineer sent a second screenshot. The logs showed the timer stepping through its stages with an elegance I had hoped for but never allowed myself to expect. He wrote a line that sounded like a person speaking while watching a line hold. Counterparties remain calm. We informed them of the independent role. Small accounts unaffected. I typed back the one sentence that will always be true. Calm belongs to people who prepared before they were asked to be brave. A message from a reporter arrived in my personal inbox. It was not a surprise. It was not unwelcome. He explained what he wanted in clear sentences and asked me to confirm that customers could still access wages and pensions and the simple instruments of daily life. I wrote one paragraph that said yes and named the parts that stayed ordinary. I added one sentence that I knew he would quote. Today is not about stopping money. Today is about keeping promises visible while leaders correct a mistake. He thanked me and promised not to decorate my words. I believed him. I turned to the appointment draft again and checked the name of the person proposed as head of compliance. I had interviewed her 2 years ago and admired her insistence on finishing a thought before anyone asked her to move on. She has the kind of mind that makes an enemy of vagueness. I wrote the assistant a brief note that offered support for the choice without making a speech. A good appointment speaks louder than any endorsement. At 12:30, I put on my coat and walked around the block. The cold drew clear lines across my face and reminded me that I live in a body, not only in a stream of paragraphs. A delivery bike moved past like a small arrow. A woman on a bench talked into a phone using the tone that means joy is near. The sky held its color the way a patient holds a pulse. I finished the loop and returned to my seat with a steadier breath. A board director called and left a simple voice message. We have accepted your condition regarding the separate appointment. Please confirm that the trustee will reduce supervision as soon as the filing is complete. I wrote him an email so that my words could be counted later. The trustee will keep the drawbridge lifted until the conflict is corrected and documented. Once documents are accepted by the regulator and counterparties, the bridge will lower in stages by market. No drama, no race, just sequence. He replied with 2 words, understood completely. The liaison returned and waited at the door as if asking the air for permission to cross. I waved him over and he sat with his hands on his knees like a student on the day of an exam. The executive is signing the appointment now, he said. Would you be willing to join him once the filing is submitted? He would like to express his appreciation. Tell him to send the filing first, then I will come for a short meeting. Appreciation is best expressed with nouns and dates. He wrote that down without flinching and stood to go. He paused and looked at my cup. Tea. He said it like a man learning a word in a new language. I nodded. T teaches patience. He tried the sentence on his tongue. T teaches patience. It fit him better than I expected. The afternoon brought a rhythm that felt almost like an ordinary day. The trustee sent a crisp schedule that laid out the steps for each market. Counterparty calls were timed with carrier capacity. Retail interfaces were verified to keep comfort visible. The words ordinary service appeared again and again. The phrase has the softness of a blanket. We need blankets when a building breathes through a storm. I checked the time. The filing would likely land in the hour. I opened section 7.15 for the first time that day and read the first paragraph to make sure the text on the page matched the text in my head. It did. The paragraph has never wanted praise. It wants to work. I closed the document and made a single note in my midday clarifications file. When people ask why a clause can feel like a kindness, show them the faces of the small ones when the machines keep humming. A junior from legal wrote with a question I had been waiting to hear. When this is over, what remains? I answered without pausing. What remains is the lesson that speed works best when it moves along rails. What remains is the knowledge that the word independent is not an insult to leadership. It is a statement of care for a building that hopes to live beyond any one person. I did not add a smile. She sent back a small thank you that needed no decoration. The barista refilled my cup unasked. I left a note by the register that said the room had been a good place to stand while the hour turned. Places matter more than people admit. This one gave me a wall and a window and the kind of air that lets thought move without tripping over itself. At 1:14, the assistant wrote again. Filing submitted. Regulator acknowledged receipt. Appointment letter attached with signatures. I opened the letter and read the names. The executive had used a pen that makes a clean line. The new head of compliance had written her name with a small flourish that made me smile. It looked like a person who believes paper can be a friend. I packed the laptop and placed the empty cup in the bus tub. On the sidewalk, the cold had learned to speak in full sentences. I hailed a cab and asked to be taken to the tower. The driver nodded without looking up from the road. He kept both hands on the wheel like a person who has never required applause to do a thing correctly. In the lobby, I handed my visitor card to the guard and told him I would go up alone. He asked if I needed directions, and I told him I knew the building better than the sound of my own name. The elevator breathed and then carried me to the floor where people prefer to use glass when wood would do. The executive office door was open. The room smelled like coffee and a decision made under duress. The executive stood when I entered and used my name in the way that tries to heal a morning with an afternoon. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for what you did." I set my bag on a chair and sat with my hands folded in my lap. "I did not do anything new," I said. "I did the thing we wrote when the sun was friendly." He nodded as if someone had told him to practice humility. "I will not test the trustee. I will not test the clause. The appointment stands." "Good," I said. "The building will thank you by remaining a building." He looked at the window and then back at me. There was a stretch of quiet that wanted to become an apology. I let it pass. An apology is a tool. It can fix or it can merely shine. Today we had fixed things. Shine could wait. He asked if I would consider returning to the old role. I said that my current scope could be useful through the transition and that the new head of compliance deserves a room without an old ghost in it. I told him I would provide a compact document that describes procedures to make independent oversight a normal habit rather than a sharp corrective. He agreed to read it without edits. I believed him enough. We stood. He offered a hand. I shook it because civility is how buildings breathe in peacetime. On the way out, I paused by the desk of the assistant and thanked her for the clarity she had provided. Her smile reached all the way to her eyes. Precision had found a home. In the elevator, I watched numbers count down like a metronome that believes in gravity. In the lobby, the guard asked if everything was all right. I said that the day would finish with its lights on. He nodded in the slow way of a person who has seen many kinds of days. Outside, the air tasted like metal and snow, even though snow was nowhere near the forecast. I walked to the river and leaned against the rail. Boats moved as if led by a conductor. The city kept its agreements with itself. I let my shoulders fall and felt the tired that comes when a long plan does its work in a short hour. My phone buzzed with a message from the new head of compliance. "Thank you for the rails." I told her they were hers now. She answered with a line that made me think we would be fine. "I will walk them every morning until the building can do it in its sleep." I returned to my apartment and set water to boil. The small room with the 3 monitors waited like a faithful animal. I sat and wrote the first lines of the compact document I had promised. Title: How to Make Independence Ordinary. Purpose: To prevent pride from leaning on a fragile wall. Method: Appoint an independent head of compliance with authority written where everyone can see. Write down the cases where the office says no. Celebrate them as guardrails, not as personal defeats. Define windows for review that align with markets. Publish the schedule where employees can watch the clock do its work. Measure trust by the number of days when nothing interesting happens. I stopped and listened. The kettle clicked. I poured and changed the page title to something smaller. Simple Habits for Clean Days. The words felt like shoes that fit. The sun slid toward the end of the afternoon. Traffic wrote itself into the streets in thin silver lines. I sent the document to the executive and to the new head of compliance with a note that said feedback welcome and 2 smile icons that looked like an attempt at humor and felt exactly right. A call came in from my mother. She asks about my work only when she senses that the air in my voice has changed. I told her that a bridge had lifted and that people crossed safely and that the bridge would lower soon. She said that I had always liked bridges. She said that I had learned early that they matter most on ordinary days. I told her she was right and that dinner would be on me next week. She laughed and told me I would lose the argument at the table. We ended the call the way we always do, with a soft goodbye that makes the room warmer. As evening approached, I opened the midday clarifications file and added one final note. When the story of this day is told, if it is told at all, let it be a thin story. Let it be the story of rules that worked and people who kept their jobs and a market that remembered how to be a market. There are better days for heroes. Today there were only adults. I saved the file and closed the laptop. In the kitchen, the cup waited. Outside, the city held its shape. I stood by the window and watched the river turn into a ribbon of light. The day had learned our names and decided to keep them safe. Tomorrow could be quiet. Quiet is the sound of a promise kept. By late afternoon, the tower was breathing again in its careful way. Doors opened, but slower. Voices carried, but softer. I logged into the secure room that is not a room at all, only a cluster of screens that asks you for your name 3 times and a code that changes its mind every 30 seconds. The invite called it an incident bridge. I called it a table. Faces assembled one by one, each framed by a rectangle that made every country the same size. Legal, treasury, risk, technology. Operations by region. The new head of compliance appeared last and nodded once to the camera in the style of a person who prefers sentences to applause. I spoke first so the day would remember its manners. Thank you for making time. We will keep the sequence in front of us. We will use exact nouns. We will put times on everything we say. Treasury asked for order. Could we walk market by market? I shared the trustee schedule and the regulator notes. Zurich is quiet, I said. Singapore is steady. Dublin had a question about a form number that is more superstition than law, but sometimes superstition is the best teacher. We answered with courtesy and a link. Technology raised a hand. Retail services remain ordinary. Institutional transfers continue subject to verification by the trustee on the classes we named. I asked them to read that sentence again, slower, until they heard its music. Ordinary. Continue. Verification. Named. People calm when a sentence carries tune and weight. The executive joined for a portion of the call and managed not to lead. That can be a kind of courage. He asked only once for speed beyond sequence, and the new head of compliance placed her finger on her copy of the schedule and said the word no the way a doctor says it when a patient asks to sprint with a fresh stitch. He accepted her no and thanked her. It is a small story, but it matters. Buildings remember moments like that. Risk wanted to talk about headlines. They showed a grid of phrases that had grown from this morning into something less sharp. Technical pause had given way to protective oversight. The phrase ordinary service had appeared on 3 feeds. The grid felt like a weather map where the storm had not ended, but began to understand it would not get to name the month. I told Risk to keep every screenshot and to keep them organized by the minute. Reminding the room of reality becomes easier when you can show the room its face. Operations by region walked us through handoffs that would happen after dinner. I wrote down the names of people I will never meet who would sit at desks while cities went asleep. The Singapore operator who had learned to love checklists. The Toronto clerk who keeps jam in her drawer for co-workers who forget to eat. The Dublin supervisor who asks every new person to tell her which rule they trust most. I write these small facts down when I hear them because the building is made of people and paper, not paper alone. When the call ended, we opened a smaller one for internal audit. I asked them to collect the chain of custody for every message and file that touched the noon transition. Include author, recipients, time, and summary of content. Tag by market. Use the phrase factual summary in the cover sheet. One of the juniors asked why factual summary instead of executive summary. Because we are not selling anything, I said. We are remembering. A message blinked on my phone from a number I did not recognize. It turned out to be an old colleague who had left for a startup that sells luck in cool packaging. He wrote that today looked brutal and that I must be thrilled. I told him that a day is only brutal if people are harmed, and that today had been precise, not brutal. He sent back an emoji that tried to wink and could not find the nerve. I closed the thread and returned to the work that would travel with the trustee into the night. I drafted a note to counterparties in each market that explained the sequence in a paragraph so simple that a tired person could read it once and keep it in their head. The trustee supervises defined assets until the conflict is corrected and documented. Ordinary services continue. We will provide written confirmation as each market accepts filings, and the trustee lowers the drawbridge by step. For questions, contact the address below, and the person whose name is on the line will respond. I gave them names with real inboxes and real eyes. The new head of compliance sent me a short list of adjustments to language in 2 notices that made them better. She removed a flourish I had allowed myself and replaced it with a term of art that regulators prefer. I thanked her and meant it. I felt something in my shoulders release. The rails had a new keeper. I ate an apple and a piece of bread without leaving the desk. The crime scene snacks of many professions are the same, simple fuel. I turned on a lamp that makes the room look like it exists for music. The city outside the window began to paint itself with light the way a careful child colors inside the line. Another call, this one with the board. They asked me to summarize the day in 3 statements for the minutes. I spoke slowly and placed each statement on the table as if it were a tool. 1. The trustee activated at noon in accordance with Section 7.15 because a conflict of roles had not yet been corrected. 2. Ordinary services for retail and small clients continued without interruption, and verification for defined assets moved to the trustee as written in the plan. 3. The head of compliance is now independent, and filings have been submitted and acknowledged. The drawbridge will lower by market in sequence subject to the trustee's confirmation. A director asked for color beyond those 3. I told him the color was gray and steady. He laughed in a tired way and said he preferred gray and steady to bright and brief. I said that I did too. He asked if I planned to return to my old office. I said that the office now belongs to the new head and that my scope remains advisory through transition. The secretary read back my 3 statements in the plain voice of a person who will always be useful. When the board call ended, I opened a file I keep for days like this. Title: Lessons that do not need a storm. I added 3 lines. Put conflict language where even optimists can find it. Teach leaders to love the word independent. Measure trust by how boring the news becomes. I stood and walked to the small kitchen and poured water on tea leaves that had already given me more than I deserved. I carried the cup back to the desk and opened the message from the reporter I had answered earlier. He had kept my sentence intact. He had placed it in a story that did not try to turn procedure into heroics. I sent him a 2-word note. Thank you. Night arrived for real. The clock on the screen announced the hour in a voice that exists only in my head. The trustee confirmed the first lowering of the drawbridge in a market that had finished its homework faster than the others. I wrote the confirmation into the master log and added a comment to remind us later that sometimes parts of a building become teachers for the other parts. The executive called again, this time from a number marked private. I let it ring once before I answered so he would know that I had a choice. He said he had signed, filed, and learned something. I told him that learning is the best way to end a long day. He asked if I had felt satisfaction when the clause spoke. I said I had felt relief. He said that word did not sell, but that it might save lives. We said goodnight as if the day were a patient that would sleep now. I closed my eyes for a minute with my palms flat on the desk. I pictured the drawbridge as a real bridge, with rivets and wood and the smell of honest tar. I pictured people crossing with groceries and school bags and plans for nothing spectacular. I pictured the bridge lowering in sections with a sound that felt like a well-tuned instrument. I opened my eyes. The kettle clicked to tell me it had guessed my next move. I smiled at a kettle. Getting through a day like this makes your heart polite. Before shutting down, I wrote to the new head of compliance. Subject: Small rails for quiet mornings. I listed 5 habits that will keep independence ordinary. Start each week with one sentence that names the rule most likely to be bent. Share it with the room. Require written reasons for every exception and store them where the next you can find them in the dark. Keep clocks on your wall that show where your promises wake and where they sleep. Celebrate the employee who prevents a headline even if their name never appears in a report. Let the trustee be a friend you call before you think you need them. She answered with a single line that made the room warmer. I will make these into postcards. I shut the lid and stood by the window. The river wore a necklace of light. A fairy cut a gentle line across the dark surface like a fond finger across a record. Somewhere in the building, a cleaner pushed a cart and hummed. I wished them a chair and a story with quiet in it. My phone buzzed one last time with a message from internal audit. All chains of custody captured. Headers and stamps in place. Labeled by market. Factual summaries complete. I wrote back a single word. Grateful. Then I powered the phone down and let the room be only a room without clocks or rules or rivers of numbers. Sleep would come when it was ready. I did not chase it. I stood still and listened to a city that had decided to keep being a city. Tomorrow would ask for more. Tomorrow often does. But tonight the rails held, the bridge breathed, and the promises remained where people could see them. The morning had ended without breaking anything. Afternoon arrived with a slower breath. I kept the window open a hand width to let the room remember that the outside still exists. The river sounded like cloth being folded. I set my notebook beside the laptop and wrote a small list headed by 3 words. Calm, sequence, proof. A calendar block appeared for a meeting that nobody had named, a room without a title. The host was the executive assistant, which meant the executive wanted to be present without being the person who sent the invitation. I accepted and added a quiet note to myself. Attend, speak less, ask for nouns. On the way to the tower, I stopped at a kiosk and bought a newspaper. The front page avoided drama. The second page called the noon transition procedural and quoted a line that sounded familiar. Today is not about stopping money. Today is about keeping promises visible while leaders correct a mistake. The ink made the sentence feel heavier in a good way. I folded the paper and placed it into my bag as if I were filing a receipt for the day. The meeting room sat 2 doors down from the boardroom and held a long table that looked like it wanted to confess something. The executive was already inside, standing, hands flat on the polished wood like a person steadying a boat. The new head of compliance took the seat closest to the door and opened a folder without fuss. Legal, Treasury, and Risk filled the other chairs with careful body language that tried to be both present and invisible. Thank you for coming, the executive said. His voice was lower than it had been in the morning, as if he had been speaking to rooms that did not listen. I would like to get us to a clean end to the day. The new head of compliance nodded. That is the plan. The trustee has sequence. We follow it. We confirm each step in writing. We stop when the last counterparty says the word confirmed. He looked at me. I appreciate your work, he said, and paused as if a longer speech might appear if silence were given more room. I kept my face quiet and my hands still. People often give up on speeches if you offer them no surface to bounce against. Treasury asked a practical question about the order in which the drawbridge would lower for larger clients who had legitimate end-of-day needs. The head of compliance answered with a list, market by market, and a phrase for each. She used the word ordinary like a repeated note in a song. Ordinary settlement, ordinary verification, ordinary confirmation, extraordinary nothing. Risk brought up press lines for the evening cycle. We agreed to a paragraph that named the sequence and carried no adjectives. The executive wanted to add the word swift. I suggested the word steady. The head of compliance said the word measured. We put measured into the paragraph. It tasted right. Legal asked the quiet question that carries more weight than its size would suggest. Do we need to consider leadership changes at the top? The room did not move. The executive looked at the glass wall as if there were words written there. The head of compliance answered with the same sentence she had used earlier. We have corrected the conflict. We will complete filings tonight. Governance discussions beyond that sentence belong to the board and to time. She made the word time sound like a tool, not an excuse. The liaison who had visited me at the coffee shop took a chair near the corner and spoke into the small gap between topics. The trustee has requested that our statement to employees tonight include a single clear assurance. He read from his notes. Wages and pensions continue as normal. Verification of defined assets by the trustee does not affect daily life. If you have a question, ask it. The building is listening. No slogans, no flares, only the words that let a person sleep. We agreed without edits. The executive turned back to me. Would you consider returning to the old role after the week? He asked it as if he had already prepared himself for a no. I told him the truth I had told him before. The office needs one name, and that name is not mine. I can continue to advise through transition. After that, the building will be steadier if my voice is only in the paper. He did not argue. He thanked me with a sentence that fit better now than it would have fit this morning. A director joined for 5 minutes to read a short board resolution into the record. It confirmed the independence of the head of compliance, acknowledged the noon activation, and instructed management to continue cooperation with the trustee until the last drawbridge step had been completed. It also promised a governance review that would not hide behind adjectives. When he left, the room felt lighter by a degree. At the end of the meeting, the executive asked if there was anything else we needed to do to bring the day down safely. The head of compliance said one thing. We need to speak to small clients in words that do not require a glossary. We will send a note to branch managers and post it where people can see it without logging in. The executive agreed and told Risk to coordinate without removing the ordinary tone. We stood. The assistant handed me a copy of the appointment letter, fully executed, as if it were a gift. I thanked her and told her the letter would keep a corner of the building from wobbling next week. She smiled like a person who had learned a new kind of math. I took the elevator down and walked 3 blocks to the small office where the trustee team had set up for the day. The room smelled like clipboards and fresh markers. A woman with a tidy braid greeted me by name and offered a chair at a table covered in paper maps of markets. She introduced herself as the trustee lead for the day. I told her I was here to listen and to answer questions that would help the bridge lower without splashing anyone. She pointed to a list on the wall that had columns for market, task, status, and next. Zurich, complete, next. Notify, Singapore, complete, next. Confirm, Dublin, pending, next. Document, Toronto, pending, next. Verify, Hong Kong, pending, next. Align, Cayman, pending, next. Sequence. The list felt like a song with an honest chorus. I asked if any column needed a different verb. She laughed softly and said that the verbs were all correct, but that she would accept a noun. Patience. I wrote patience onto my own list as if it were an item that could be packed. One of her team members asked for a brief history of section 7.15. I told them without drama. After an old storm, the building learned to write better clauses. The clause allows a pause when signatures change. It moves defined assets to a table where a person who is not inside the story can check the paper. It makes sure that small promises are kept while large egos learn humility. I did not point at the executive office when I said ego. I did not need to. The trustee lead asked if I would review a draft of the note to small clients. I read it and changed 3 words. I replaced instrument with account. I replaced oversight with watch. I replaced activation with start. I kept the phrase ordinary service. The lead thanked me and said that words are tools. She said she liked tools that people could hold with one hand. By the time I left the trustee room, the sky had begun turning into a mirror. Streetlights came on one by one like slow applause. I returned to my own apartment because I wanted the last stage of the day to be written from the desk where I write the things I mean most. Emails stacked themselves like polite bricks. A regional manager sent photographs of a small branch where a teller had posted the note for customers. The note was simple and clear. Ordinary service continues. If you have a question, ask us. The cashier had added a smiley face in pen. I let myself enjoy the face for a beat longer than I might on an ordinary day. Internal audit sent a summary of chain of custody so far. Headers captured. Timestamps aligned. Attachments validated. Cross-checked by market with the trustee list. They asked permission to schedule interviews for tomorrow with whoever had touched the noon messages. I replied with a yes and added a request. Ask everyone the same questions and change nothing in the wording. Variations make rooms invent stories. Consistency helps memory keep its shape. The reporter wrote again to say that the evening edition had moved the story off the front page. He said it was a compliment that will not feel like one. It felt like a compliment to me. I told him that quiet is the sound of a promise kept. He said he might make that the headline of a different piece one day. I told him to buy the barista a coffee if he did. The new head of compliance pinged me for a quick call. She wanted to walk through the first morning after. We listed items in the order they should happen. Confirm remaining filings. Release trustee confirmations by market. Speak to branch managers. Speak to large clients. Publish a one-paragraph note to employees that says thank you and nothing else. She added one more item. Begin the governance review without resting. She said the word without resting like a person reminding herself that the road continues past the crest. After the call, I drafted the compact document I had promised the executive. It carried 10 pages and one idea. Independence is not a punishment. It is the shape of care when a building wants to last longer than the names on the doors. I kept the sentences short and the verbs active. Name the role, define the scope, require written reasons for exceptions, publish windows of review, log every message, align by market, respect regulators, respect employees. Close with a map that shows who is allowed to say yes and who is allowed to say no and how both are measured. I sent the document and slid the chair back from the desk to let the room settle. The open window let in the scent of something warm from a restaurant on the corner. I let the scent fill the air while I placed my pen on top of the notebook and closed the computer with a soft click. My phone buzzed with a message from the executive assistant. The executive asks for permission to share your compact document with the board. I wrote yes and suggested he share it with the head of compliance first. She replied that he already had. A small victory for order. Another message came from the trustee lead. Last market through. Drawbridge lowered. Sequence complete. She sent a photograph of the whiteboard with every line marked complete. I stared at it longer than a photograph of a whiteboard deserves. It was beautiful in a plain way. Finished work is often the most beautiful thing a day can offer. I wrote 3 final notes for myself before I allowed the day to close. 1. People kept their routines because paper kept its promises. 2. The word independent earned its pay. 3. Tomorrow needs to be boring. I stood by the window for a while and watched the street write itself in small scenes. Someone walked a dog that did not know or care that a trustee had spent the day watching over the town. Someone carried a pie in a white box with a string and moved carefully as if they held a small moon. A bus sighed and took the hill. A cyclist laughed at nothing I could see. I brushed my fingers over the spine of the notebook and spoke aloud a sentence that belongs to no one and to everyone. The building stood. Then I turned off the lamp, closed the window, and let the city take care of its own light. Evening gathered itself into careful folds. The trustee board showed every market in green, but green is not peace. Green is preparation. I opened the folder that few people ask to see and fewer ask to understand. It holds the basement things. Mandates, powers of attorney, lists of who may sign for whom and under what sky. Each document is a staircase that leads to a door with only one key. Internal audit requested short interviews. I asked them to begin with me. We met on a video call that made our faces look honest and washed. The senior auditor asked the same questions she would ask a clerk in Toronto or an operator in Singapore. What did you do between 11 and noon? Which documents did you send? Who received them? What was your intention? I answered simply and slowly. I wanted protective measures to hold until conflict was corrected and documented. I wanted ordinary service to continue. I wanted written reasons for every exception. She nodded and read back my answers as if they were lines from a prayer. When the call ended, I opened section 7.15 again, not because I had forgotten its language, but because I wanted to feel the steel of it under my fingers. The clause mentions independence more than once. It mentions small accounts and employee benefits with the care of a person who has watched a paycheck become rent, food, medicine. It does not know the word prestige. It knows the phrase duty of care. A message from the trustee lead arrived with 3 attachments. The first was a schedule of confirmations by market. The second was a short note prepared for branch managers to use if customers asked why the news had said our name. The third was a request. Please review the draft of our overnight report. Keep the language plain. I read it carefully. I deleted a few adjectives that had wandered in like tourists and replaced them with nouns that carry weight. The lead thanked me within a minute. It is a gift to work with people who keep their thank yous near the front of the line. I walked to the window and leaned my palm against the glass. The city looked like a map made of light and patience. Somewhere inside that map, a cleaner pushed a cart, and a guard watched a lobby, and a driver checked a mirror, and a cook salted a pot. The work of keeping a building standing has always been larger than any single room. Back at the desk, I drafted a small document and gave it a plain title. Chain of signatures. It listed who could sign what, where, and why. It named backups. It named the rule that a signature earned by fear does not count. It added a sentence that has helped 100 quiet days remain quiet. If a signature is needed in less time than it takes to write a reason, the signature can wait. The executive assistant wrote to ask whether the compact document on independence could be shared with senior managers below the board. I said yes. She wrote back a sentence I like very much. The document already has a life. Papers that deserve to live often learn to walk before anyone introduces them to a crowd. The new head of compliance called for a short walk through the morning after. We agreed on the order of speeches. First, the trustee would confirm the last market. Then the company would publish a note to employees and clients that said very little and meant quite a lot. The board would announce a governance review with a calendar attached. She would hold a small room with branch managers and answer questions with the words ordinary service until the phrase sounded like a lullaby. She asked if I could attend a late meeting with an external counsel who knows how to speak in paragraphs that judges respect. I said yes. We met on a call that opened with 2 sentences and a silence. Counsel asked about the integrity of the chain of custody for the noon messages. Internal audit joined and answered with dates, times, headers, and logs. Counsel asked whether any messages had been sent that attempted to influence the trustee. No. If any arrive, they will be logged and disclosed. He did not smile exactly, but his eyes softened. That eye movement is a kind of smile in our trade. Before I closed the laptop for a breath, I opened a folder labeled Past Lessons. There were a few notes from older days when storms did not end so peacefully. We had learned to be clearer. We had learned to walk our clocks without running. I added a line to the top of that folder to thank the younger version of me who had written down procedures when praise was scarce and neon was fashionable. I do not like neon. I like lights that let you read. The phone buzzed. A colleague from an old regulator job sent a folded message. Proud of the rails. I sent back a simple line. The rails were teamwork across years. She replied with a name of someone who had left the company long ago after a fight about an adjective. We smiled at the same memory without writing it down. Night deepened until it felt like velvet. The trustee lead sent one more note. Last confirmations received. Overnight report final. See you at first light. I wrote thank you and then wrote it again because once did not feel like enough. I opened the notebook where I keep sentences that should live close to the door. I wrote 3. Write rules as if you will need them on a day when you are tired. Build clocks where pride cannot lie. Put small people at the center of your maps. I closed the book. The day turned toward its ending. The basement of signatures was in order. The staircases led to the right doors. The keys rested where they belonged. I washed the cup and left it to dry. I told the room it had done well, and the room believed me. I woke before the alarm, not because I was worried, but because the body learns the hour that it owes. The kettle clicked. The cup warmed my hand. I opened the windows wide enough for the air to say its name. The screen filled itself with the overnight report. Everything that needed to happen had happened. The drawbridge was down. The roads were clear. The lights kept their quiet. At 8, I walked to the small office where the trustee had worked the previous day. The whiteboard had been wiped clean. Only a faint grid remained, a ghost of boxes and verbs. The trustee lead greeted me with the calm of a person who had slept and dreamed of nothing complicated. She handed me a printed page, the official account of the noon activation. It used few words and none of them auditioned for applause. The executive arrived a few minutes later with the look of a man who has decided to sit in a smaller chair. He read the same page, placed it on the table, and exhaled a sentence that did not ask for pity. Thank you. It was not for me alone. It was for the rules, for the people who keep clocks, for the rooms that prefer nouns to noise. A board director joined us with a folder the color of a sensible coat. He read a short statement into the air for the record, and then he did the quiet thing that not every director remembers to do. He asked the trustee lead if any member of the team needed a day off or a meal brought home or a line in their file that would help the next time raises were counted. She said yes to all 3. He wrote the requests down in his own book with a pen that looked heavy enough to remember. The new head of compliance and I walked back to the tower together. She had slept 2 hours and looked ready for 10 more days. We rode the elevator and she spoke a sentence that invited the twist to step into the light without fanfare. You know the question we will face at the employee town hall. Did you design this clause to take our leader down? I asked if she wanted a line that could be said and then understood without translation. She did. I gave her the line. I did not design it to take anyone down. I designed it to hold everyone up. It keeps small promises safe while big titles correct mistakes. It gives the building a way to stay a building. She repeated it once and nodded. We said nothing else, and the elevator let us out into a floor that had scrubbed its face for morning. The town hall was streamed to screens in branches and kitchens and trains. The executive spoke first. His voice did not shake. He said that a conflict had been corrected and that the company would be reviewed by people who were not afraid of paper. He thanked the trustee. He thanked the new head of compliance. He did not thank me by name. He did not need to. The head of compliance spoke next and said the line we had practiced. She added 3 more. Ordinary service continues. If you have a question, ask it. If you are told to hurry, ask why. The chat window filled with small notes that had no questions in them. Thank you. We were scared. We are less scared. My father asked if his pension would arrive. It did. A teller in a small town smiled back through the camera. She looked like a person who had stayed on her feet for a long time and had finally found a chair. The board director spoke last. He announced a governance review to be led by an independent firm with a calendar attached. He promised to publish the calendar and the report without hiding behind adjectives. He used the word without instead of no. Without gives the mind a map. No is only a wall. After the town hall, I walked to a conference room that looks over the river. The reporter called at the agreed hour, and I gave him the simplest version of the truth. The clause existed before the morning that needed it. It activated because 2 roles became 1. It moved certain assets under a trustee so that small promises would not be trampled by big pressure. The bridge lifted and then came down. The city kept its shape. He asked if there was a hero. I said the hero was a paragraph in a policy manual. He laughed without mocking and said that would never make it into a headline. I told him headlines are for weekends. Paragraphs are for weekdays. He wrote that down even if he knew he would not print it. At lunch, the executive asked to see me for 6 minutes. The assistant made sure it would be 6. We sat in his office with the door open 1 inch. He said he had learned to love the word independent. I said it is the quiet heart of any building that wants to outlive its names. He said he would recommend to the board that I be offered a return to my old seat. I declined again. He did not push. He said he hoped I would stay through the review. I said I would. When I left the office, the liaison caught up to me with an envelope. It contained a copy of the board resolution and the first page of a policy with a new preface. The preface credited no single person. It credited the habit of writing things down before the day demanded them. It credited the people who love clocks. It credited the teller in a small branch who tapes the notice to the window without smudging the tape. In the afternoon, the trustee lead sent a gentle note that asked if the phrase protective measures could be retired for now in favor of ordinary supervision. I agreed. Words have half-lives. When a day is over, some words should be allowed to rest. I spent an hour with internal audit while they conducted interviews with people who touched the noon messages. They asked the same questions every time and recorded the answers without decoration. The transcript will make sense later because it makes sense now. At 3, the head of compliance sent out a 1-page document to all managers. It had a title that made me smile. Simple Habits for Clean Days. It was my list that she had turned into cards. She added a small square at the bottom of the page where a manager could write the rule of the week in their own words. People like to be invited into a rule. Rules like it too. The day moved forward without trying to show off. The markets did what markets do when they are allowed to be adults. The news moved on to a different story that wanted more light than it deserved. I closed the files I had kept open for 2 days and watched the desktop clear like a beach after a tide. Noon had become a sentence in a report. That is all it ever needed to be. On the way home, I stopped by the coffee shop. The barista poured hot water into my cup and nodded at me with the look that says we survived a small storm together without anyone else noticing. I left a note on a napkin that said thank you for the wall and the window. She will not know what I mean. She will understand anyway. At my desk, I opened the notebook for the last time and wrote the line I had given the head of compliance, because a line like that belongs in more than one room. I did not design it to take anyone down. I designed it to hold everyone up. I closed the notebook. The room breathed. I let the day end. Morning returned like a reliable bus. I brewed tea and checked the calendar. There were 3 meetings and none felt like an ambulance. Internal audit planned a brief closeout on the noon transition. The board scheduled the first session with the governance firm. The head of compliance asked for half an hour to finalize the public note that would close the loop. I began with the public note. It was a paragraph and a half. It said that the trustee had completed supervision. It said that ordinary supervision had resumed under the independent head of compliance. It said that wages, pensions, and daily services continued as always. It said thank you to employees and clients without adjectives. The head of compliance changed one line so that the verb sat straighter. She added a sentence about the governance review with dates attached. We read it aloud once and were done. The audit closeout took 12 minutes. They had chain of custody, interview notes, headers, stamps, and a timeline that would stand without leaning on a person. They asked if any exceptions had been granted without written reasons. None. They asked whether any communication had attempted to influence the trustee. None that were not promptly logged and shared. They thanked everyone in the room and reminded us to keep our personal notes until the regulator confirmed that they had taken custody of the official record. It is easy to love auditors on a day like this. The board began the governance review with a single rule. No speeches longer than 1 minute unless a question requires a longer answer. The external firm introduced itself in the style of people who understand that trust is a commodity best traded in silence. They outlined their plan: interviews, document review, a map of authority, a set of recommendations with numbers attached. They did not promise inspiration. They promised work. I liked them immediately. After lunch, the executive asked for a final conversation. We met in a smaller room than yesterday and left the door fully open. He said he had accepted that my old seat belonged to someone else now. He asked if I would consider writing a longer manual on independence for training. I said yes if I could title it like a children's book. He smiled and asked for the title, Bridges and Rails. He nodded and said he would read it to his staff. I said I would make sure the pictures were clear. We stood by the window and watched the river move. He said he would remember the feeling in his throat at noon for the rest of his life. I said that feeling is a teacher and that if he respects it, it will keep him from running red lights. He thanked me with a small bow of the head. I returned the bow because ritual matters when pride has been asked to sit. I sent a note to the reporter to say the story was finished. He replied that he would not write a follow-up unless something broke. I told him that not breaking is the point. In the late afternoon, I walked to the small branch that had taped the notice to the window. The teller recognized me from a photo somewhere and thanked me for words that customers did not need to translate. I told her the credit was hers. She had written the smiley face. She laughed and said she would write another one next time we needed to calm a room. I suggested a small star instead. She said stars make people dream. I said dreams are compatible with rules. She agreed. Back home, I opened a new document and wrote the first page of Bridges and Rails. It began with a picture in my mind of a child standing at the edge of a drawbridge, looking at the hinges and asking why everything fits so neatly. The text under the picture said this: a bridge is a promise and a rail is a habit. The promise without the habit is a story. The habit without the promise is a chore. Together, they let a town live near a river without fear. I wrote until the sky traded its bright coat for something softer. The head of compliance sent a final ping. Public note published. Employees have begun to forward it to their parents. She added a smile icon that looked exactly right. I poured another cup and stood at the window where the city keeps its diary in light. Cars wrote paragraphs. People crossed sentences. Somewhere a piano practiced scales. Somewhere a dog made sure the building knew it was being watched. I thought of the younger version of me counting clauses in a room that smelled like paint and hope. I thought of the morning at 2:07 and the word understood. I thought of noon turning into a sentence in a report and staying there. I sent a last short message to the trustee lead. Thank you for the drawbridge. She replied with a single line. Thank you for the river. I closed the laptop and let the room be a room. No alarms, no special glow. The building stood. The stairs were safe. The lights were honest. Curtained by procedure, which is to say that nothing spectacular happened, which is to say that the promise was kept.